But right now, time to have a chat to Giles Thompson, the CEO of Racing Victoria, with big news announced yesterday. Finally, the culmination of the Aquanita case, and it has been decided that 72 of the 81 horses implicated will be disqualified. However, the prize money for those horses that are disqualified will not be recouped by Racing Victoria, and those that are elevated because of those disqualifications will be paid out by Racing Victoria, which is taking that financial hit. Giles, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, Michael. I'm okay, thanks.
Racing Victoria doesn't get many bouquets normally. It's usually brickbats, but I think well done on the decision that was made yesterday. It's a common sense decision. It would have been hard to recoup that money from a number of years ago, and I think it would have left a bad taste in a number of owners' mouths. So it's a $1.4 million hit to Racing Victoria. Was it a difficult decision for the board to make?
Yeah, I mean, I think just taking a step back, the whole issue was an extremely complex one for the stewards as well. You know, this was, and we've got to remember this, it was a systematic cheat by a small number of individuals over a long period of time, and it was a very complex case that has taken time to really get through, and also to give the wide range of owners and other impacted people the opportunity to really have their say in the process. Really, really complex for the stewards. The stewards made their decision, and then, of course, it becomes a very difficult decision for the board after that. So once the stewards, just to clarify, once the stewards make the decision to disqualify the 72 horses, it is mandatory that the prize money is then paid to the people who finish below those horses. They get elevated, and that prize money is mandatory at that point, and that will be paid once the appeal periods have run out in about 60 days' time. The board then had to make a decision which is discretionary, not mandatory, whether to then see whether they could, whether they wanted to exercise their discretionary power to try and recoup that prize money. To give you some idea of the scale and the complexity of this, when we will pay out the $1.4 million to those owners elevated, there'll be 1,900, roughly 1,900 individuals who will be receiving some money. So when the board is sitting down to consider this, the complexity of it, it's taken us a long time to get to this point. Lots of moving parts, lots of input around the particulars of the case. It was very complex, but I think you're right. I think it's a common sense decision. The decisions is made, or the way that the decision is approached is in the interest of the industry as a whole. And I think this is in the industry's interest as a whole that we move on and we try and put this really difficult chapter behind us.
Of those 72 that have been disqualified, Black and Bent, a Grand National winner, and Brungle Cry, also Grand National winners. So a couple of feature races there, but there were 8 horses that were deemed not needing to be disqualified, including Politeness, who won a Group 1 race. So the reason for those 8 not being disqualified, Giles, what was the determination there?
Well, the decision process for the stewards was after the VCAT decision, and that followed a RAD board decision. There was actually 395 implicated sectors coming out of those decisions and that bit of work. So in fact what the stewards had to do is the stewards then had to work out whether they could be comfortably satisfied that those horses should be disqualified. They whittled down the 395 to 81, and they said, right, we think that there is a process to go through at this point where we're asking people to show cause why those 81 horses shouldn't be disqualified. At that point, a wide range of submissions were made, very detailed submissions in certain cases, running to several pages, and going through all those submissions, looking at the facts that were being presented, looking at the facts from the VCAT hearing, the stewards then only ended up with 72 that they could get comfortably satisfied. So it's not that those 9 have been found to not be disqualified. It's that in fact only 72 were found to be disqualified. So arguably 323 of the original potentially implicated acceptors were decided not to be disqualified, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. It's a bit complicated.
Sorry.
It's a bit complex.
Yeah.
Just one last thing on the Aquinnita case, because I know as part of the decision that was handed down, the money will not be paid to those who have been disqualified, which obviously is Robert Smurden, Tony Vassell, Stuart Webb amongst them, the trainers that have been disqualified, and the money is trying to be recouped from those. And I know there was a fine for those trainers, especially Robert Smurden as well. Now, what's the status of that? Have those fines been paid, and what avenues will Racing Victoria need to take to try and recoup the monies and also ensure that those fines are paid as part of the penalties that were handed down?
So the fine hasn't been paid by Smurden yet, the original fine, and added to it will, of course, be these reclaims for prize money. We'll use all the measures at our disposal. As I said at the very beginning, this was a systematic cheat by a small number of individuals. It has hurt the reputation of Victorian racing, arguably more than anything else ever has, and has also harmed the reputation of the many honest, hard-working people within it. It's incumbent upon us, I think, at Racing Victoria to ensure that those fines and those prize monies are repaid by those individuals. They have done the wrong thing, and they should be made to pay the full amount that is due to the industry.
Giles, I'll change topics, and we've been discussing the last couple of days. There's been plenty of media commentary and social media commentary about the success of the All-Star Mile, which was fabulous on Saturday. It was a brilliant day, and it was the culmination of what had been a big build-up, and we look ahead to the next year's running of the All-Star Mile and what the Autumn Carnival may look like. I'll play you a little snippet of Michael Brow, Moonee Valley CEO, also Steve Rossich, the boss of Flemington, and Josh Blanksby, the boss of the Melbourne Racing Club, about what their thoughts and visions may be for next year's Autumn Carnival, and I'll get your reaction.
Picking up week 1 at Flemington to feature the Lightning Stakes. Week 2, head to Caulfield. Whether it's the or the Futurity, one or the other. Head back to Caulfield the following week for the Blue Diamond and the Oakley Plate. The 4th week, back to Flemington for the Australian Guineas and the Blamey Stakes. Then, if the Valley was to retain the All-Star Mile on a Saturday, we would couple up the William Reid Stakes with that. The following week, head back to Caulfield. That would be the Futurity, if not the Ore. And then the last week of the Autumn Carnival, 2 weeks after the All-Star Mile, the Australian Cup and the Newmarket.
Within that proposal, there's 3 Saturdays in a row at Flemington across 5 March, 12 March and 19 March. One of the things that Michael raised was the All-Star Mile being 2 weeks before the Australian Cup, Group 1 2,000 metre race, and clearly that's something that needs to be seriously considered and makes quite a bit of sense in terms of the progression.
I personally don't mind the idea of the All-Star Mile being the final, grand final of the summer-autumn if you're going to put that much investment. Remembering, the industry's invested sort of probably close to $20 million into this race in the last 3 years when you count prize money and the promotional spend, probably more. So if you're going to do all that, what are you doing it for? You're trying to make sure that new people are getting involved in racing and getting engaged in it. So I don't mind it as the culmination of the summer-autumn.
So Michael Brow wants the whole autumn rejig, 7 weeks, and he wants to keep the All-Star Mile. Steve Rossich, 3 Saturdays in a row, maybe have the All-Star Mile 2 weeks before Super Saturday with the Australian Cup, and Josh Blanksby said he's happy to leave the All-Star Mile as the final pillar of the Autumn Carnival. What do you like, Giles?
Well, I like the fact that all 3 clubs are keen to have the All-Star Mile. That's a good start. I also like the fact that we're talking about the autumn racing program and the features of it and the key pillars within it more than we've ever done before. And that was the whole point of the All-Star Mile, was to try and really energise the summer-autumn period that we felt was undercooked. It wasn't getting the recognition it deserved. It's a great period of racing, and it's great that we're talking about that. One thing I do note is that I think all three positions as expressed on your show aren't necessarily compatible. I don't think they necessarily line up. I think for me there are two key questions here. One is, what is the best period of time for the late summer autumn carnival? At the moment, it's pretty fixed. It has been for a period of time. It finishes pretty much this weekend coming up as we roll into footy, and that has served us well, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't change that. And I think particularly Michael's view was that we should extend a bit later into March, and there's some real merit in that. I think historically racing's been very scared of AFL. I think we've now shown that we can find our place within September, and therefore we need to seriously think about whether we can find our place a little bit later in March as well. The challenge that, of course, is about the national pattern. Does that clash? I think the second question is that whole pattern point, which is, what is the structure within our carnival? How does it work? And also, how does it work into the national pattern, with the slippers starting this weekend, for example. But from a pattern perspective, one thing I did note in the conversations you've had so far this week is a bit whack-a-mole. You try and fix one problem and you create another problem somewhere else. So there's been some great successes across the broader pattern because of the All-Star Mile. It's really elevated some races. I'm not sure it's hurt as much the Australian Cup as some suggest, but I'm open to listening about that, and that we might fix that and create another problem. So it's very complex. As all three guys said, we'll sit down and have lots of conversations about it in the coming weeks and months as we try and really take the momentum that's been created this year and over the last couple of years and try and really further strengthen the summer and autumn period.
So last one just on that, you wouldn't be against moving the entire autumn carnival back a couple of weeks?
I'm not against anything at this point, Michael. That would be the wrong thing to do, is to be against that. I understand why it's attractive. You create a bit more of a gap from the spring, but I think there are challenges. We get into worse weather, we get into a clash with footy, and we get into a clash with Sydney, and all of those are downsides of doing that. But there might be enough upside that it's worth doing.
Speaking of clashes with Sydney, are we any closer to getting the Racing Australia board meeting underway in regards to the WIP review?
We're continuing to have those conversations with Racing Australia, Michael. That's probably the best way to describe it.
So no date being set?
As I say, we're continuing to have those discussions.
Okay. Are we close to the Anthony Van Dyke review being released and protocols for the upcoming spring?
Yeah, so a huge amount of, effort's gone into that over since the last 4 months, since spring. The work is coming to a close. It's coming to trying to firm up some of those recommendations. They aren't yet finalised. There's still a bit of work to do on that. We're conscious that we need to get there to give plenty of notice to both the local industry, but also those who might want to come down in spring as well about any changes. My best guess is that we are looking to make announcements around those recommendations the week 1 or week 2 of April. We're working closely with the VRC on this. There's their committee, our board. There's a few things just to work through at this point, but the back has been broken of that piece of work.
All right, Giles, appreciate your time this morning. Plenty of news, as always. It's going to be an interesting couple of months with all these reviews ongoing, and we'll wait to see when we finally get that Racing Australia board meeting. Appreciate your time.
No problem, Michael. Speak soon.